Good morning to everyone at today's public hearing of Panel A of the Prosecutor Vetting Commission. My name is Christopher Lehman, chairperson of this panel, and I declare the session to be open. The Prosecutor Vetting Commission is established under Law 252 on the external evaluation of judges and prosecutors. Law number 252 establishes that this commission will undertake an ethical and financial evaluation of prosecutors who are identified under Article 3, Paragraph 1 of that law as subjects of the evaluation. This three-member panel is constituted to conduct the evaluation pursuant to Article 15 of Law 252. The hearing is being conducted pursuant to the provisions of Article 16 of that law, as well as the Commission's rules of procedure for evaluations under Law 252. The subject of today's hearing is Andrei Balan, a prosecutor in the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Mr. Balan, welcome. I'm joined by my colleagues on the panel. To my right is Nadezhda Hriptievsky, and to my left is Saskia De Vries. The panel is also assisted by members of the Secretariat. The hearing is open to the public and members of the media. The hearing will be conducted in interpretation into both English and Romanian, and to allow for accurate interpretation, I ask that everyone speak slowly and clearly. The proceedings are being recorded. The recordings of the public hearing will be available online on the Commission's website within 3 days after the hearing. At this point, I'd like to review the procedural status in this case. A report in this case was previously approved within the appropriate time period allowed under Article 17, Paragraph 2 of Law 252 by a unanimous vote of the members of Panel A of the Commission on the 9th of September 2025. That report was sent to the subject and to the Superior Council of Prosecutors in a timely fashion consistent with the provisions of Article 17, Paragraph 5 and Paragraph 6 of Law number 252. The report of the panel was rejected by the Superior Council of Prosecutors on the 2nd of October 2025 under Article 18, Paragraph 3, Letter B of Law 252, and was returned to the panel, to this panel, for further evaluation. The panel is now conducting the resumed evaluation of the subject under the provisions of Article 20, Paragraph 2 of Law 252, and Article 30 of the Commission's Rules of Procedure. This hearing was scheduled pursuant to Article 30, Paragraph 2 of those rules and is held under the provisions of Article 16 of Law number 252. The subject was notified of this hearing on the 27th of March, 2026. In the notice of the hearing, the subject was advised that the panel maintained doubts about the subject's financial integrity. Those doubts were identified and detailed in the annex to that hearing notice sent on the 27th of March. The subject was further advised that the panel did not consider it necessary at this stage to hold a further hearing, but would do so at the subject's request. The subject did thereafter request that a hearing be held. Mr. Balan, thank you again for appearing today. We'll now proceed with any questioning, and you will be given an opportunity to make a statement to the panel. Let me just put my headphones on. Do either Nadia or Saskia, do you have any questions? So at this point, Mr. Balan will give the floor to you.
Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to make a small comment that before the public hearing, I provided the panel a written opinion with enclosed documents and evidence that are overturning the doubts of the commission, of the panel that was established with respect to the doubts related to my financial integrity. I didn't hear back from the commission, but I hope that these documents were received. I just want to know, should I speak about them in detail, or I just want to know what my defense position should be now?
The documents that you emailed to the commission were received and reviewed, so we do have those, but as I say, you're welcome to make a presentation to the panel at this time.
Thank you. Esteemed panel, first I would like to speak about the fact that my family did not have a negative balance in amount mentioned by the panel at the end of 2012. And hereinafter I would like to speak point by point regarding this argument. As I mentioned previously, including the question round, in question round 2, answer 3, the reserves at the end of 2011 of my family consisted of 14,000 euros. Sorry, I asked him to speak the numbers slowly because the reserves were 14,000 euros and 60,000 Moldovan lei, the equivalent of total amount of 288,620 lei. So to explain in detail how this amount was gathered, when calculating the savings existing at the end of 2011, I believe that there should have been taken into account the financial savings of my family since 2010 in an amount of 446,183 Moldovan lei, equivalent of 27,000 euros, which resulted from salary income received in 2010 in a total amount of 67,794 lei, sale of a Mercedes car on the 21st of October 2010, which means at the end of 2010, in a total amount of 5,500 euros, equivalent of 90,145 lei, a sale that is confirmed by my statement of a person who purchased the vehicle, information from the Public Services Agency that proves that this car was sold on the 21st of October 2010. As I mentioned from the statement of a person who bought the car at the price of 5,500 euros, that it is also confirmed in a message from a company that deals in selling cars, which specified the price of that car varied between 5,000, specifically 5,150 to 600-250 euros. And last but not least, this income is confirmed by the data in the Declaration of Assets and Personal Interests that I filed for the year 2010, a declaration, as I was able to inform from the materials that the Commission shared with me, is attached to the case materials. Also, my family's income for 2010 was a donation from my parents on the 23rd of November 2010 in an amount of 20,000 euros. This donation was proved, in my opinion. This was money obtained as a result of selling an apartment, as well as 53,000 lei, money that was gathered over the years 2009 and 2010. Last but not least, there were ignored my financial savings for 2011 that were obtained during 2011. Here, I would like to clarify that from the beginning of the hearing of the question rounds, specifically round 2, question 3, that's where I clearly explained that at the end of 2010, I had reserves in an estimated amount of 25,000 lei, and in the same question round, I explained how that 25,000 amount was obtained, saying that it was a cumulated amount, money from selling the car at the end of 2010, and donation received from the parents on the 23rd November 2010. And in the end, I added more, that at the end of 2011, my family had an estimated reserve of 14,000 and 60,000 lei. 14,000 euros and 60,000 lei. Unfortunately, it is not clear to me how was my reserve as of the end of 2011 was established, and for what reason, when calculating it, you considered only the parents' donation, from which it was subtracted. Well, the installment paid for the apartment was subtracted from it, speaking of company B, as well as a privatization of an apartment in an amount of 200 euros, if I'm not mistaken. A period of time when, previously, as I mentioned, I had reserves made from selling the car. Moreover, I also had reserves from the salaries, because my salaries and my wife's salaries for 2010 covered the CEP expenses, and out of it, 25,000 they were left. So the way that my financial reserve at the end of 2011 was determined in an amount of 9,018 euros, or equivalent of 147,332 lei, that does not reflect the actual financial situation of my family. The approach that was used does not follow the principle of global assessment of income and expenses of my family. It is rather relying on an arbitrary selection of my family's reserve, which unavoidably leads to a distortion of a final result. From the very beginning, an amount that was not real was established. The panel decided to subtract from the 2011 expenses exclusively from the donation received from my parents, received at the end of 2010, as I mentioned. Ignoring in an unjustified way the existence of other legal income that were actually obtained during that period. Because in 2010, my family received not only the donation of 20,000 euros from the parents, but also salaries, cumulated salaries in an amount of 67,794 Moldovan lei, and as I mentioned, also the amount of 5,500 euros, the equivalent of 90,145 lei, at the equivalent on the date of selling the Mercedes car, the sale of which, as I mentioned, is confirmed by evidence. This income is actual disposable income that was proved by means of evidence provided to the panel both during the re-evaluation and before the hearing in my statement of position that was sent on 4th of April 2026. The reserves had to be included into the mechanism of covering expenses. By ignoring these resources and by using exclusively the donation as a basis of subtracting expenses made in 2011, the panel by implicitly excluded significant income from its financial analysis, because at the end of 2010, as I mentioned, my family had a reserve of 446,083 lei, the equivalent of 27,000 euros. But during the question rounds, when asked what were the estimate reserves, my family mentioned the amount of 25,000 euros. So the family had much more money than what was mentioned in the answers to the question rounds. It is not clear for what reasons the expenses related to year 2011 were not subtracted from the salaries, my and my wife's, and from the income obtained after selling the Mercedes car in 2010, but only from my parents' donation. It is not clear to me why it was done this way. This approach is not only missing economic substantiation, it also contradicts the common logic of managing financial resources, according to which current expenses are covered naturally from current income. That is, salaries or money obtained from transactions, and not from exceptional resources such as donations. For instance, my salary income, mine and my wife's, are in lei. Current expenses are also in lei, which means from the salaries, money obtained from salaries, we covered expenses according to the CEP, that is an amount of around 38,194, and out of it, 28,130 lei was left. At the end of the year, we add to it the money obtained from selling the car, as well as the donation from my parents. What would be correct was the expenses for 2011 to be related to the total available income at the end of 2010, income that is confirmed by evidence, and I will explain that in more detail a bit further on. And the expenses should have been deducted from the accumulated total funds, not from only one component of the funds, as the donation was. Alternatively, a logic approach towards the financial flows expenses should have been covered as a priority from salaries, as I mentioned, and the sale of a car, which would have allowed to keep entirely or to a significant extent the donation in the structure of a reserve for the year 2011. By means of the method used, the method that was used led to an artificial decrease in my family's financial reserve, suggesting indirectly that the donation would have been used, while in reality the existence of other income sources would have allowed to preserve it. This omission, in essence, means ignoring relevant financial evidence and leads to the presentation of an incomplete and distorted financial situation. Consequently, the calculation of the reserves cannot be considered objective because it does not reflect the actual flow of income and expenses and does not cover all of the. By selecting unilaterally the donation as a source and by omitting other income that were approved in 2010, I mean income obtained from salaries, sale of a car, and donation. This led to an artificial decrease of the reserve and I think the actual financial condition of my family at the end of 2011 and in 2010. In the context of what was mentioned, in order to carry out a fair and objective evaluation, the Commission is obliged to be extremely diligent in order to ascertain exactly the reserves of my family at the end of 2010, because I did not have big purchases in that year that can be easily proved. All the information that I believe was checked by the panel. I did not buy anything, and I sold the car because the car was bought in 2010, and that money was added to expenses. It is also equally important that when the income of my parents was established, the panel started to check the period starting with the year 2000, while in my case, it avoids to look into my family's income in 2010 and 2011, because the money obtained during those years was supporting the amount of savings at the end of 2011, because my arguments that were confirmed by evidence were ignored, and it was also confirmed by irrefutable mathematical. This is in an amount of 147,332 lei to the end of 2011. It requires that a detailed, thorough analysis in the form of a table should be done of my family's income and expenses for the years 2010 and 2011 in order to see, or to establish and to see the actual reserve that my family had before the period of covered by the evaluation. So, in order to establish the real situation, my family's income and expenses for the year 2010 to 2012, I expressed them in Table 2 and 3, tables that were provided to the panel before the hearing. And I am going to speak again about the income and how such income was obtained in 2010. So, in 2010, the income of my family consisted of three sources. The first one was my salary and my wife's salary. The second source is the income obtained from selling the Mercedes on the 21st October 2010 in an amount of 5,500 euros, equivalent of 90,145 lei, which previously, by means of evidence and argument, I hope I convinced the panel that this income was truly obtained. And last but not least, it's my parents' donation in an amount of 327,130 lei. The panel accepted as a donation only the money obtained from the sale of the apartment. And the amount of 33,000 was not accepted, claiming that my parents did not have financial resources available. Here, I would like to clarify, at the risk of repeating myself, that during the evaluation and during the resumed evaluation, I provided documents to the panel from local public authorities that confirmed that my parents are working in agriculture. They are raising poultry and cattle in their household. At least they did until 2016. Speaking about cattle, that is pigs and cows, I provided to the panel the declaration, besides certificates from a local public authority that my parents were having this kind of activity. I also provided the panel with declarations from 23 people, including some people holding the neighboring land plots to my parents' ones. At the same time, farming, agriculture, by means of the evidence provided previously to the panel, I mean information provided by two winemaking companies that purchased grapes from my parents. In two cases only, my parents were selling it to a legal entity. Other times they were selling the grapes on the market and to people in the village. And this is how it is done today as well. Unfortunately, that is the reality in the Republic of Moldova. And as a result of these such transactions, no fiscal invoices or receipts, no contracts are concluded. I also provided to the panel information regarding livestock and poultry, including cattle, that are confirmed by the statements of the veterinary doctor responsible for that sector, who was taking care of those animals. And in case of slaughter, he was issuing sanitary certificates. And if the meat was sold, that certificate would be provided to the company buying the meat. I also provided information that, among others, in the years 2009 and 2010, my parents delivered meat, cow and pig meat, with a precise amount to Company F, whose administrator is VC. And the statement of that administrator confirmed that the amount of meat that was received and the cost per kilo, as well as and the amounts that were paid for the delivered meat. Next, I will speak about selling animals. My parents were also selling animals. That is confirmed by the statements of 23 people. And the purchase of pigs is confirmed by the statements of 7 people who bought them from my parents. And in those statements, they wrote the price from 800 to 1,000 lei. And how heavy they were, the weight of those animals. Also, I provide to the Commission before the hearing information that I took over from the cattle market from Strasheni, which confirmed that in the period 2009-2010, my father was going to that market to sell animals. With respect to the weight of a meat from an animal, speaking about a cow or a pig, during a year of bringing them up, the sale price, all this data is reflected in the information of 2 public authorities, namely Association of Producers of Pork in Moldova, and last but not least, information provided by the Ministry of Agriculture from the Department of Veterinary Medicine, documents that I also provided to the panel prior to the hearing. Based on these documents, it is clear how many animals could be obtained as a result of breeding, what was the quantity of those animals, livestock in a household. It also reflects what's the price of 1 kilo of beef or pork meat. I also provided to the Commission information about the sales in 2009-2010 sale of grapes. Indeed, that sale of grapes is confirmed only by the statement of 2 people who bought grapes, but we couldn't find the others because mostly it was sold on markets. But the fact that my parents were working the land, they were growing grapes among others. This is confirmed by 2 fiscal documents of year 2003 and 2015, which proves that my parents were selling grapes to companies, obtaining money from those sales, which means that these land plots were not just left, they were being worked and used. To confirm this income, I drafted a table number 1, that was attached to my opinion, which, well, sometimes I was also making reference to the public data of the National Bureau of Statistics, and the data is accurate. So I reflected what was the income that my parents earned in that period of time. So consequently, the total income of my parents earned in periods 2009-2010 was 442,103 lei. Out of that, I deducted the CEP for 2 people for 2 years. 2009 and 10, obtaining thus the amount of 394,593 lei. It is true that to deal in agriculture, to bring up animals, it requires effort, physical effort, and financial expenses. Speaking about physical effort, we, the family members, were all active participants when it comes to financial expenses. Yes, there were some expenses buying diesel for transport, and also expenses related to the sale of products when you have to go to the market. But these are minor expenses, and even if hypothetically these expenses were 5,000 per year, the year 2009 and 2010 would cover 10,000 of these. And if we deduct that from the amount 394,593 lei, the amount of 10,000 lei that would be expenses, we are left with 384,593. Therefore,
it is logical and it makes sense that my parents were able to have that amount of 307,130 lei. That makes the donation of 20,000 euros. As regards the expenses of my family in 2010, and by the way, apologies, but I wanted to say that, in fact, by putting together, by summing up all of this income for 2010, the total amount was for my family. So 485,147 lei. And given that in 2010 my family did not buy anything, and if you subtract expenses for the CPP, for the population expenses, then as a reserve at the end of 2010, what we have left is 446,183. That is what we left here for that year, 2010. Therefore, with these savings in late 2010, we go into 2011, and in 2011, my family had income, confirmed, supported income, with information from the State Tax Service of 13th of June 2025. And there was also the declaration of assets that is also available. In my file, income was from salary 51,137 lei. That's mine. And 25,567, that's my wife's. At the same time, there was also income as reward fees, 9,694 lei, that was confirmed by the National Social Insurance House of 25 August 2025. This information was made available to the panel as well. And there was also income of 45,055 lei, and this was on the basis of sick leave and childcare allowance, and that's from the National Social Insurance House as well. And this income went to my wife. This information was confirmed with information on the 8th of September 2025. They did that. At that date, that was also made available to the Commission. And as for the 2010 reserves of savings, they were 446,183 lei. So, esteemed panel, I don't want to steal your time, but I just want us to make some objective mathematical calculations. This shows that throughout 2011, my family had an income of 584,636 lei. Now, with this amount, we can subtract, and then starting from this, we can subtract all the expenses of 2011, and that would be the consumer basket for 4 children. That was established at 37,890, and a down payment for a contract, a company B, 124,068 lei, 80,000 lei spent for the Hyundai and expenses of 3,346 lei. Therefore, it turns out that in 2011, my family has had expenses of 533,924, which is much less than income. But I've shown the amount that I've had as savings, the 268,620, which was estimated amount. When the panel asked me about my reserve savings at the end of 2011, 2012, 2013, at that time we didn't know, but then as we had to make these calculations, we sat down and we went through all of that information and we made calculations. The estimated income was 284,625. But in fact, I had a much bigger amount. So in 2012, I had much more than I've initially put down in the beginning of the year. And I would like to add one more thing, that when it comes to the population basket, the consumer expenditure for 2011, the CEP, I did not subtract yet the out of that the food for the infant, which was 4 months old. And then we've had clothing donated, for instance, that we didn't have to buy. Some of the clothing right after the birth some of the clothing was donated by the daughters of our godparents, by the godparents, because their daughters have worn them. So if we make the calculations the right way, it would turn out that in 2012, it's not 147,000 that I had as established. But if we take into account the reserves, some of the savings, that at least some of those that I've shown, the one that was 288,620, then, in fact, in late 2012, at the end of 2012, my family couldn't have had a negative balance. So this was all with regards to the savings, the reserve of my family for 2012. If you have questions, I am ready to answer them.
Nadia.
Now, Mr. Balan, when we had the first hearing for the initial evaluation, we did not manage to clarify this. Now this was clarified with you, and you provided a very detailed account, but I'd like to ask for an explanation as to why you haven't reported the 20,000, the alleged 20,000 euros donation that you claim to have received in 2010. Why did you not report it? Why did you not put it down in your NIA declarations? You did not mention it anywhere. And the first time that you spoke about it was in the answers provided to the Commission. This donation did not appear earlier. And you mentioned that you kept providing evidence, but what is in fact the evidence supporting that statement? There's just the sale and purchase agreement whereby your parents in 2010 have sold an apartment. Is that right? And is there anything you'd like to add to clarify this matter? Thank you for the question. I regret that it was not asked earlier. As regards the donation, I would like to explain that in 2010, the donation was not to be reported in the assets, in the declaration of assets, and I wanted to be as thorough as possible in describing this particular situation. In the answers that I've provided in the post-assessment round of questions. At that moment, there was just one column, one field. You were supposed to put down income that was legally obtained, and such as, in brackets it said, allowances, pensions, stipends, that was all. Therefore, all of those who were filling out the declarations at that time, they were not reporting donations. As a result of that, in 2011, some legislative proposals were tabled that were meant to have the law amended, and thus there was supposed to be an additional column, an additional place for us to report donations, to report the donations received by the subjects of the evaluation. And by that law, with its further amendments, well, that had a result, the amendment of the form itself, of the template. a new field was thus added, donations. And that field that used to be there in the past, other legal income, such as pensions, stipends, allowances, it also remained, which is indicative of the fact that nobody was reporting donations at that time. And I would like to bring more light to this. In that note to the Parliament, and I, by the way, have made reference to that in my explanations for the first round of questions after the, as part of the reassessment, there is a draft law, and that explains also the reason for those amendments to the law. The note, explanatory note, says that the donations were not being reported, so there was a misunderstanding of the legal requirements. And that is why I hadn't reported at that time. And the fact that you say that this donation was mentioned now for the first time, and in fact that is not true, because from the very first round of questions I've stated that I had a donation from parents of 20,000 euros. Mr. Balan, please do not reinterpret what I said. I said that for the first time you've mentioned it in the rounds of questions, as answers in the rounds of questions from the Commission. That's what I meant and that's what I said. Understood? Apologies. Well, afterwards, since 2012, in 2012, you were supposed to report donations. I couldn't have reported in 2012 the donation that I had received back in 2010. So the donation does not represent income in your interpretation? It is, but it says legal income, which means coming from institutions, what you've received from institutions. All right, understood, and no more questions from me.
Please continue.
Next, I would like to address the negative balance for 2020 and 2021. I would like to say that I disagree with the amounts established as cash savings at the end of 2020 and at the end of 2021. The Commission has put down for the end of 2020 the amount of 215,000 and at the end of 2021 the amount of 468,000. I'd like to underscore that these amounts are put down in the Declaration of Assets and Personal Interests as cash savings as at the 3rd of March 2021 in that declaration that was filed for 2020. And therefore, on the 9th of March 2022, in the statement that I filed for 2021. So the amounts that are put down as at 31st of December, in the declaration they are as at the date that I filed the declaration on. And I made a clarification. According to Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the Law 133 of 2016, with regards to the Declaration of Assets and Personal Interests, the subjects shall report until the date of the 31st of March all of the income received in the previous fiscal year. And the assets owned as set out in Article 4, Paragraph 1, L and B, as at the date of the declaration. So the law required me to report on the date of filing the declaration, to report the amounts that I had as savings, as a reserve. And thus, I put down the amount of 215,000 lei and 468,000 lei. This requirement shows, appears in Article 4, 1, letter D. And I will quote, the assets owned shall be reported, that is, the cash in national currency or in foreign currency, if that is above 15 average salaries in the national economy. And I would like to mention in this regard that on the 31st of December 2020 and therefore on the 31st of December 2021, at that time I had cash savings of 125,000 and 268,000 respectively. This information was shared with the panel by me in the first round of questions, before any issues having been raised with regards to negative balances. In the first round of questions, I've explained the panel that the amount of 215,000 lei reported in cash on the 3rd of March 2021, that is, the 2020 declaration was filed on the 3rd of March 2021. So that consists of 125,000 lei that I had at the 31st of December 2020, and 90,000 that was lent to me in March 2021 from SS that I borrowed. Therefore, the 90,000 lei, that amount, couldn't have been reported as a reserve on the 31st of December 2020 because I had only borrowed it as late as in March 2021. I've also informed the panel about the fact that the amount of 498,000 reported on the 9th of March 2022 in the 2021 declaration, a declaration covering the year 2021, that consisted of the cash available on the 31st of March 2021, that was the 30,000 out of the salary earned in 2022, and 200,000 that was borrowed on the 6th of March 2022 from AT. So 200,000, the amount of 200,000 couldn't have been cash savings as of the 31st of December 2021 because that amount was obtained later in the year. I'd like to mention that the money I borrowed in 2021 and in 2022 and in 2023 of 90,000, 200,000 lei and 220,000 lei from SS, AT and AM, they are confirmed by their own statements. They've also provided information, including accounting documents, as to the source of the money and about how the money was brought into the country. I would like to again emphasize, though I might be reiterating some pieces of information, but I have to make sure there is utmost clarity as to what I am reporting now, that the Law 133 of 2016 provides for the obligation to file the declaration of assets and personal interests for the year, for an entire year. So those are annual declarations, as until the 31st of December. That is, within 3 months after the end of the fiscal year, you have to report that, and you have to also specify what savings you had as at the date of filing the declaration. For 2020, I filed my declarations on the 3rd of March 2021. For the year 2021, I filed my declaration on the 9th of March 2022. And for 2022, I filed my declaration on the 27th of March 2023. Therefore, the amounts that were put down as cash as at the date of the filing of declarations in 2021, 2022, and 2023, that is, the amounts of 215,000, 498,000, and 770,000, they cannot be regarded as cash available as at 31st of December of the year for which the declaration is filed. Therefore, to clarify all of these matters, I illustrated my point of view in table number 5. All of this is over there in hope that it'll provide more clarity. I've also asked the panel, and I might reiterate this, to exclude some expenses paid for by card for third parties, because those amounts, I'd like to mention them in particular, 5,986 and 3,210 lei, these were returned back by those people. And that is confirmed through the statements of those people who were the beneficiaries of those particular services that those amounts are tied to. There are also statements of my son, and I would like to mention that, yes, indeed, if I think back of 2021, indeed, I have told the Commission that in that apartment on BV, on that street, on BV Street, that my son, too, was staying there, was living there. It's only that I hadn't mentioned that that my son, too, was living there. So that was that one little word that I've omitted. But in that apartment, there was my grandson and my son. And now, because I don't want to take too much of your time, again, I put down in the information table 6 and 7 regarding the income and the expenses of my family for 2020 and 2021. And out of that, through mathematical calculations, correct mathematical calculations, you can see that, in fact, my family did not have a negative balance for those years. And ultimately, in the end, I would like to ask the panel to put down as income to add the 6,000 lei amount that was paid by the Prosecutor General in 2021 for my trip to Ukraine. That is the per diems. And I provided the panel information documents with regards to the fact that I was accommodated in a particular hotel. I've showed the hotel and the receipts confirming that I stayed in that hotel. In that hotel, breakfast was included. And therefore, the second meal, dinner or lunch, I wouldn't spend money because that would be organized by our colleagues from the National Bureau of Anti-Corruption from Ukraine. I mean, they were showing their hospitality that way, which is what I did in 2017 when they visited us. So I had no expenses on that particular work-related trip. The Office of the Prosecutor General paid for accommodation that included breakfast and transportation there and back. I drove my car, my own car, but they covered insurance and all the other required items. So roughly that was all from me, honorable panel. I am open to answer any of your questions regarding these matters if you have any.
Let me see if either of my colleagues would like to ask any follow-up questions on the presentation. Mr. Balan, thank you. Yes, please go.
Chairman, only one little thing to add, something that I had forgotten regarding some documents with regards to my parents' financial capacity. I've submitted throughout all of this period before the hearing, when questions were raised before the public hearing in 2025. And afterwards to the SCP, there's banking information regarding the salary-based income of my parents. And I hope it's there, and I hope it's there in the file, where you can see clearly that my parents, and I speak of 2009 and 2010 specifically, because this is an important matter for the reserves that I had that could be added to the money obtained to the proceeds obtained out of the sale of the apartment. So my parents have reported, you can see my father's income, and you can see that he was not withdrawing the money on a monthly basis, but that he would do that every half a year or at the end of the year. He would withdraw the money from the card and put it away for reserves. And that shows us yet another time that following and thanks to his work in agriculture, to raising livestock and selling that, he had additional funds, proceeds from his livestock. So that's why he didn't even need to withdraw money from his salary card. That's one little thing that I wanted to add. Thank you, Chairman, and I'm ready and here to answer any other questions that you have.
Thank you. Again, let me just double check. Mr. Balan, thank you for sharing with us today this information. We'll certainly, and as I've noted, we've already received this in electronic form. Certainly will be considered among all the evaluation materials. Thank you for your participation throughout the evaluation process and at this period. The panel will now deliberate on the matter and the hearing is closed. Thank you.
Thank you, too, for having given me the opportunity to speak regarding the matter in a way that is as clear as possible with regards to the claimed doubts. Thank you.